The knock on my door was less a sound and more a physical assault. It was a frantic, desperate pounding that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards and up into my teeth. Outside, the world was ending in a deluge of biblical proportions. Rain hammered against the window panes with the fury of 1,000 tiny fists, and the wind howled a mournful, operatic solo that made the old building groan. I had been curled on my sofa, cocooned in my favorite wool blanket, listening to the symphony of the storm and feeling a quiet, solitary contentment. That contentment shattered with the first thud against my door. My first thought was that a tree branch had finally given up and was trying to beat its way inside. My second, more rational thought was that my elderly neighbor, Mr. Henderson, had fallen again. I untangled myself from the blanket, the cool air of the apartment raising goosebumps on my arms, and padded to the door. I peered through the peephole, the fisheye lens distorting the hallway into a warped, yellow-lit tunnel. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. It was Sam. He was a drowned wraith, a specter of the man I knew. His dark hair, usually so artfully messy, was plastered to his forehead and cheeks, channeling rivulets of water down his face. His leather jacket, his prized possession, was soaked a deep, miserable black. But it was his posture that struck me the most. Sam was always a bastion of easy confidence, all broad shoulders and a lazy, knowing grin. The man shivering on my doorstep was hunched, his shoulders drawn in, his entire body trembling with a violence that was visible even through the distorting lens. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers suddenly clumsy. The lock scraped open with a sound that seemed obscenely loud against the roar of the storm. I pulled the door inward, and he practically fell inside, bringing with him a blast of cold, wet air that smelled of rain and ozone and damp earth. He stood dripping on my welcome mat, his teeth chattering so hard I could hear them click together. "Sam." My voice came out as a stupid, useless croak. He looked up, and his eyes, usually a warm, mischievous hazel, were wide and unfocused, the color of moss under dark water. He tried to speak, but the shivers racking his frame were too severe. A sound escaped him, a guttural noise of pure, animal misery. He hugged his arms around himself, his hands tucked into his armpits, but it did nothing to quell the tremors. "God, Leo," he finally managed, his voice a ragged whisper. "Power's out at my place." A pipe burst in the ceiling. It's raining inside my apartment." He tried for a weak, self-deprecating smile, but it was a pathetic failure, a mere twitch of his pale lips. My brain, which had short-circuited at the sight of him, finally rebooted. Action. He needed action. Okay, come on. Get that jacket off. You're soaked through." I reached out, my hands hovering uncertainly for a moment before I took hold of the wet, cold leather of his jacket sleeves. The material was stiff and unforgiving. His whole body felt like a block of ice beneath the fabric. He was unresponsive, his limbs heavy and limp as I wrestled the jacket off his shoulders. It landed on the floor with a wet slap. Underneath, his t-shirt was plastered to his chest, outlining the hard planes of his torso in a way that my mind registered and immediately tried to file away for later, safer contemplation. Now was not the time. "Bathroom. Now," I commanded, my voice gaining a firmness I didn't feel. I steered him by the elbow, his skin shockingly cold against my palm. He stumbled along, pliant and unresisting. I pushed him gently into the small bathroom, the bright, sterile light making him look even more pale and ghostly. I started turning the shower dial, ignoring the protesting squeal of the pipes as I pushed it all the way to hot. Steam began to mist the mirror almost instantly. "Get out of those clothes," I said, my back to him, focusing intently on a loose thread on the shower curtain. "All of them. Get in the shower. Stay there until you can feel your fingers again. I'll get you some dry clothes and a towel." I heard a faint, "Okay," behind me, the word barely audible over the hiss of the water. I didn't dare look back. I fled the bathroom, closing the door softly behind me, and leaned against it, my own heart hammering against my ribs. The image of him was seared into my brain. The dark hair clinging to his skin, the water tracing the line of his jaw, the utter vulnerability in his eyes. Sam. My Sam. Not mine, of course. Never mine. But in the decade we had been friends, since we were dumb kids in college sharing lukewarm beers and existential crises. He had always felt like a fixed point in my universe. He was the sun, and I was just a planet in a comfortable, predictable orbit. He was loud and bright, and drew people to him effortlessly. He dated a string of beautiful, vivacious women who all seemed to adore him, even after he inevitably, gently, broke their hearts. He was, to put it plainly, the straightest man I knew. And I, quietly, hopelessly, had been in love with him for exactly 10 years, 3 months, and roughly 2 weeks. It was a fact of my life I had long since accepted, a dull, chronic ache I had learned to live with. It was the background radiation of my existence. Seeing him like this, stripped of his usual armor of confidence, so utterly broken down by something as mundane as a storm, it scrambled all my carefully constructed defenses. My concern for him was genuine and overwhelming, a fierce, protective surge. But tangled up in it was the treacherous, selfish hum of longing. The desire to wrap him up, to hold him, to pour my own warmth into his frozen body. It was a dangerous thought, one I shoved down deep as I hurried to my bedroom. I pulled out my thickest towel, a soft gray one he'd complimented once, and a set of my most comfortable clothes, a worn-in band t-shirt, and a pair of soft flannel pajama pants. They would be a little short on him. Sam had a good 2 inches on me, but they would be warm and dry. I laid them on my bed, my hands moving with mechanical efficiency while my mind raced. What was I doing? This was Sam, my best friend. He needed help, and my only job right now was to provide it without letting any of my stupid, complicated feelings leak out and make things weird. It was the role I had been playing for a decade. I was the steady, reliable friend. The safe one. The one he could crash with when his power went out. I couldn't afford to be anything else. I took a deep breath, schooling my features into an expression of calm, platonic concern. I gathered the clothes and the towel and walked back to the bathroom door, listening for a moment. The shower was still running. I knocked softly. Sam, I'm leaving some stuff for you out here. Thanks, Leo. His voice was stronger now, muffled by the door and the running water, but clearer. The shivering edge was gone. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. I set the folded clothes and the towel on the small table in the hallway and retreated to the living room, my sanctuary. I picked up his sodden leather jacket, the weight of it surprising me, and hung it on a hook by the door where it began to drip a sad little puddle onto the mat. I gathered the wool blanket from the sofa and folded it, smoothing out the creases with deliberate care. I needed to focus on tasks, on tangible things. If I let my mind wander, it would inevitably wander back to the image of his t-shirt clinging to his chest, and that was a path that led nowhere good. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The storm raged on, a constant, roaring companion. I made tea, the ritual of it calming my frayed nerves. The whistle of the kettle, the clink of the mug, the fragrant steam of chamomile and honey. I sat on the sofa, cradling the warm ceramic in my hands, and waited. The bathroom door finally opened. Sam emerged, enveloped in a cloud of steam, smelling of my soap and shampoo. It was a scent I knew intimately on myself, but on him, it was completely different. It was deeper, muskier, mixed with his own inherent Samness. The combination was intoxicating and deeply unsettling. He was wearing my clothes. The t-shirt, an old one from a concert we had gone to together years ago, stretched taut across his broad chest and shoulders. The flannel pants, as I had predicted, ended a few inches above his ankles, revealing a strip of pale, damp skin. His hair was damp and tousled from the towel, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. The color had returned to his face, a healthy flush warming his cheeks. He looked soft, domesticated. He looked like he belonged here. I hated that thought more than anything. Feel better? I asked, my voice studiously casual. He nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. He gave me a genuine smile this time, a little tired around the edges, but real. 1,000,000 times. You're a lifesaver, man. I think I was starting to get hypothermic out there. Don't be dramatic, I said, though my heart gave a little lurch at the word. I made tea. He sank onto the other end of the sofa, a respectable distance between us, and gratefully took the second mug I had poured. He wrapped his long fingers around it, soaking in the warmth. We sat in silence for a moment, a comfortable quiet we had shared thousands of times before. But tonight, it felt different. It felt charged, humming with a strange new energy. Or maybe that was just me. It was probably just me. So, I began, needing to fill the silence. What are you going to do? Your landlord, Sam sighed, staring into his mug, called him. He said he can't get a plumber out until this storm lets up. Probably not till morning, maybe later. My bedroom is basically a water feature right now. He took a sip of tea. Guess I'm homeless for the night. He looked over at me, his hazel eyes searching my face. It was a look I knew well. It was his "Can I crash here?" look. You can take the couch, I said immediately, the words coming out faster than I intended. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but it's dry. Leo, you're the best. I owe you 1 inch. He leaned back against the cushions, a long sigh of relief escaping him. He looked utterly exhausted. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. His eyelids were already starting to droop. Get some rest, I said, standing up. I'll grab you a pillow and a blanket. In the linen closet, I pulled out the spare set. A plain blue pillowcase, a thick quilt my grandmother had made. They smelled faintly of cedar and disuse. As I carried them back to the living room, a wave of profound melancholy washed over me. Here he was, in my home, wearing my clothes, about to sleep on my couch. It was the closest I would ever get to the life I secretly, foolishly, dreamed of. A domestic, shared existence. And for him, it was just a convenient place to crash. A port in a storm. The disparity of it was a familiar, bitter pill. I tossed the pillow onto the couch and unfolded the quilt. He was already half asleep, his head lolling to one side. Thanks, he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. He barely moved as I draped the quilt over him, tucking it around his shoulders. My fingers brushed against the warm skin of his neck, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt straight through me. I snatched my hand back as if I had been burned. He didn't notice. He was already drifting off, his breathing deepening into a slow, even rhythm. I stood there for a long moment, watching him. In sleep, his face was unguarded. The faint lines of stress around his eyes were gone. He looked younger, more like the boy I had first met in that crowded college lecture hall. The boy whose easy laugh had felt like a revelation. I turned off the main light, leaving only a small lamp burning in the corner, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. I retreated to my bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it for the second time that night. The sound of his breathing, even muffled by the door, was a tangible presence in my apartment. My small, quiet world had been invaded. And the worst part was, I never wanted him to leave. I got into my own bed, the sheets feeling cold and unervingly empty. I could hear the storm still raging, the rain a relentless percussion against the glass. But a new sound had been added to the mix, the soft, rhythmic sound of Sam breathing in my living room. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and knew with a grim certainty that I would not be getting any sleep that night. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind, seemed amplified. My mind was a whirlwind of anxieties. Was he warm enough? Was the couch too lumpy? What would happen in the morning? Would this just be a funny story he would tell his next girlfriend? Yeah, my buddy Leo saved me from the great flood of 23. He makes a decent cup of tea. I would be relegated back to my role as a background character, a piece of set dressing in the epic movie of his life. After what felt like hours of torturous, circular thinking, I heard a noise from the other room. A soft rustling, then a muffled groan. I sat up, my ears straining. Was he having a nightmare? I held my breath, listening. The rustling continued, more insistent now. Then, I heard a soft thud, followed by a quiet, pained curse. My heart hammered against my ribs. I slid out of bed, my feet silent on the cool wood floor. I cracked my bedroom door open just enough to peer out. The dim lamplight cast a warm, golden glow over the living room. The quilt I had given him was a tangled heap on the floor. And Sam was curled up on the sofa, shivering again. It wasn't as violent as before, but it was undeniable. His knees were drawn up to his chest, his arms wrapped tightly around himself, his shoulders trembling. A low, miserable sound escaped his lips. The deep chill from his earlier soaking must have settled into his bones, a lingering cold that the shower and the tea hadn't been able to touch. My carefully constructed walls of detachment crumbled to dust. Seeing him like that, so miserable and alone in the dark, I couldn't stand it. The platonic friend role evaporated, replaced by a raw, overwhelming need to comfort him. I pushed the door open and stepped into the living room. Sam, I whispered. He startled, his head snapping up. In the dim light, his face was pale, his eyes wide and glassy. Leo, sorry. Did I wake you? His teeth were chattering again. I just can't get warm. My mind went blank. Every rational thought, every rule of self-preservation I had lived by for the last 10 years, flew out the window and was swept away by the storm. All that was left was him. Cold. Shivering. In my house. The couch is an ice block, I heard myself say, the words feeling like they were coming from someone else. It's not going to work. He just looked at me, a helpless expression on his face. And then the most insane, world-altering words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. Come on, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Get up. You can take my bed. He stared at me, confusion warring with misery in his eyes. What? No, man, I can't kick you out of your own bed. I'm not. I wasn't offering to leave it, I said, the admission hanging in the air between us, heavy and terrifying. I clarified quickly, my cheeks burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I just mean it's a big bed. There's enough room. And it's warmer than this damn couch. We can just, back to back. For warmth. It's practical. Practical. It was the most ridiculously inadequate word I had ever used. Sam looked from me to my open bedroom door, then back to me. He was shivering too hard to argue. A long, silent moment passed between us. A moment where the entire history of our friendship seemed to hang in the balance. Then, he gave a slow, shaky nod. Okay, he whispered. Okay, Leo. He untangled himself from the couch, his movements stiff and clumsy. I stood frozen, watching him walk towards my bedroom, towards my bed. It felt surreal, like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. He was actually going to get into my bed. My brain couldn't quite process the reality of it. I followed him into the room, my own personal sanctuary. He stood uncertainly by the side of the bed, looking at it as if it were a strange, alien object. I pulled back the covers on the side nearest the wall. You take this side, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded wordlessly and slid under the covers, still wearing my t-shirt and flannel pants. He curled up immediately, his back to the center of the bed, pulling the comforter up to his chin. I watched him for a second, my heart doing a frantic, painful dance in my chest. Then, I walked around to the other side and got in. The mattress dipped with my weight. I settled down carefully, keeping as much space between us as possible, lying rigidly on my back, staring up into the darkness. The bed, which had always felt so large and empty, suddenly felt impossibly small. I was acutely aware of him, of the heat radiating from his body just inches from mine. I could hear him breathing, a soft, shaky sound in the quiet room. We lay like that in silence for what felt like a lifetime. The only sounds were the storm outside and the frantic beating of my own heart. The tension in the room was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket. I was so terrified of making a wrong move, of breathing too loudly, of letting him sense the absolute chaos that was raging inside me. But the shivering didn't stop. I could feel the faint vibrations through the mattress, the tremors that still racked his body. He was trying to suppress them, I could tell. He was trying to be as still and unobtrusive as possible, but the cold had too strong a grip on him. Another miserable, quiet groan escaped him, and then, his voice, low and ragged from the cold, cut through the darkness. Leo? Yeah. I managed my own voice tight. I'm sorry, man. I'm still so damn sea-cold, he sounded defeated. Ashamed, almost. This is stupid. I should just go back to the sea couch. No, I said, the word sharp, more forceful than I intended. Don't be an idiot. You'll freeze out there. A pause. Then, hesitantly. Could you just... I don't know. This is gonna sound weird. What is it? My entire body was coiled like a spring. Could you just turn over? So we're back to back? My mom used to say shared body heat is the fastest way to get warm. He let out a shaky, self-conscious laugh. God, I can't believe I just said that. My mind is a static-filled television screen. All I can hear is the roar of blood in my ears. This is happening. This is actually happening. I roll over slowly, my movements stiff and mechanical. My back meets his. The contact is electric. A full-body shock that travels from the base of my spine to the tips of my fingers. Through the thin cotton of our shirts, I can feel the heat of his skin, the hard line of his spine, the broad expanse of his shoulders. And I can feel the tremors, the deep, uncontrollable shivers that are still shaking him. My own body is a furnace. I am suddenly, intensely aware of my own warmth, my own life force. And he is a block of ice, leaching that heat from me. I want to give him all of it. I would drain myself to nothing if it would just make him stop shivering. We lie there, pressed together in the dark. The sheer, overwhelming intimacy of it is staggering. I have spent a decade carefully maintaining a platonic distance, and now our bodies are aligned, spine to spine. I can feel the rhythm of his breathing, the frantic beat of his heart against my own back. I try to regulate my own breathing, to match his, to project an aura of calm I am nowhere near feeling. Slowly, miraculously, it starts to work. The violent shivers begin to subside, replaced by a finer, less desperate trembling. The heat is transferring between us. I am warming him up. The thought sends a wave of something fierce and protective through me. It feels primal. It feels right. His body, which had been rigid with cold and tension, begins to relax against mine. He lets out a long, slow sigh, a sound of deep, shuddering relief. The last of the tension seems to drain out of him, and he slumps against me, his weight solid and real. His breathing deepens, evening out. The fine trembling ceases. He is finally, truly warm. He's getting comfortable. He shifts slightly, nestling his shoulders more firmly against mine. The back of his head brushes against my own. His hair is still slightly damp, and the clean, soapy scent of my shampoo fills my senses. My shampoo. On him. In my bed. It's too much. It's everything. I am wide awake. Every nerve ending in my body is on high alert, cataloging every sensation. The solid weight of him against me. The warmth of his skin. The soft sound of his breathing, now deep and even. He's falling asleep. He is falling asleep pressed against me. I should be relieved. I should be glad that he's finally warm, that he's comfortable. But all I feel is a rising tide of panic and a desperate, aching tenderness that threatens to drown me. This is a fantasy made real, a dream I never dared to have, and it is absolute torture. Because I know it means nothing. To him, this is just a practical solution to a physical problem. It's a human hot water bottle. It's just bodies in a bed, a temporary arrangement born of necessity. For me, it is the most intimate moment of my entire life. A memory surfaces, unbidden. Us in college, studying for a final. We were in the library, sprawled on a beanbag chair, books and notes scattered around us. I had fallen asleep, and when I woke up, my head was resting on his shoulder. He hadn't moved. He was just reading, a small, soft smile on his face. When he saw I was awake, he just winked and said, "Nice drool stain you left on my shirt." Buddy, he had made it a joke, diffused the intimacy instantly. He was always so good at that, building a connection, then pulling back just enough to keep it firmly in the realm of friendship. This feels different. There's no one else around. There are no books, no jokes. There is only the darkness, the rain, and the undeniable reality of his body against mine. He shifts again, and this time a sound escapes his lips. A low, soft murmur, thick with sleep. And in that murmur, I hear my name. Leo. It's not a call. It's not a question. It's a sigh, a release. A single, breathy syllable, drawn out into a soft moan of comfort. He says my name like it's the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. Like it's a safe harbor. My heart stops. It literally just stops beating for a solid second before it kicks back into gear with a painful, violent thud. He said my name. Not in a delirious, feverish way. Not as a plea for warmth. He said it with the contentment of someone sinking into a place of perfect comfort. A place of safety. He's asleep. He doesn't know he said it. He's just dreaming. It means nothing. I repeat the words to myself like a mantra. It means nothing. It means nothing. It means nothing. But my body doesn't believe it. A treacherous warmth spreads through my chest, a dangerous, foolish hope that takes root in the deepest part of me. And then he moves again. He's not just shifting for comfort this time. He is turning. Slowly, deliberately, in his sleep, he is rolling over. My entire body goes rigid. I don't breathe. I don't move. I am a statue carved from pure terror and anticipation. He turns until he is facing me. The arm that was trapped between us is now free, and it comes to rest on my waist, his hand splayed loosely against my side. His legs tangle with mine under the covers. And his face is inches from my own in the dark. I can feel his breath, warm and even, ghosting across my cheek. This is no longer practical. This is no longer about sharing body heat. This is something else entirely. He has, in his sleep, pulled me into an embrace. He is holding me. I lie there, my eyes wide open in the darkness, my mind screaming. This has to be a dream. A vivid, cruel, impossibly detailed dream. Any moment now, my alarm will go off, and I will wake up alone in my cold bed. But the weight of his arm on my waist is too real. The warmth of his breath on my skin is too present. The solid, living presence of him in my arms, or rather, me in his, is undeniable. He murmurs something else, a nonsensical string of sleepy syllables, and nuzzles his face into the curve of my neck and shoulder. His nose is cold against my skin. The light stubble on his cheek is an abrasive, electrifying texture against my throat. My carefully constructed world, my decade of discipline and restraint, shatters into a million pieces. I am lost. I am completely and utterly lost. What do? What am I supposed to do? Do I push him away? Do I wake him up and risk humiliating us both? Do I just lie here and pretend to be asleep, letting him hold me, stealing this moment of impossible intimacy that he won't even remember in the morning? The choice is taken from me. His breathing is deep and steady. He is sound asleep, lost to the world. And he is holding me like he never wants to let go. So I stay. I let myself be held. I close my eyes and I allow myself, for the first time in 10 years, to pretend. I pretend that this is real, that this is not an accident of a storm and a broken pipe and a cold night. I pretend that he chose this, that he chose me. I match my breathing to his, and slowly, cautiously, I let my own body relax. I let my head sink deeper into the pillow. I let my tense shoulders fall. I let myself feel the solid, comforting weight of his arm around me. And as the storm continues to rage outside, I am wrapped in a stillness so profound, so complete, that it feels like the eye of a hurricane. Here, in the circle of his arms, I am finally, terrifyingly, at peace. And just before I drift into an exhausted, dreamless sleep, one single, traitorous thought echoes in the quiet of my mind. I feel like I'm home. I woke slowly, drifting up from a deep, peaceful slumber I hadn't experienced in years. My first conscious thought was of warmth. A profound, bone-deep warmth that seemed to emanate from every part of me. My second thought was that I was not alone. There was a heavy, solid weight across my waist and a soft, rhythmic breathing against the back of my neck. The memories of the night came rushing back, not as a dream, but as a series of sharp, sensory snapshots. Sam at the door, drenched and shivering. The steam of the shower. The sight of him in my clothes. The cold mattress. The electric shock of our bodies touching. His sleepy, unconscious murmur of my name. His arm wrapping around me. My eyes snapped open. The room was filled with the soft, gray light of a post-storm morning. The rain had stopped. The only sound was the gentle dripping from the eaves outside my window, and the sound of Sam's breathing. He was still there, still holding me. His arm was thrown possessively over my waist, his hand resting on my hip. His face was buried in my hair, his breath puffing gently against my scalp. Our legs were still tangled together under the heavy comforter. He hadn't moved all night. He had held me through the entire storm. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the warm fog of sleep. This was real. This had happened. And now it was morning. The morning, with its harsh light and its demands for explanation and confrontation. What would happen when he woke up? He would pull away. I knew he would. He would wake up, realize where he was and what he was doing, and he would recoil as if he'd been burned. There would be a moment of horrified silence, and then he would scramble for an excuse. Wow, must have been really out of it. Or, sorry man, I'm a cuddly sleeper. He would laugh it off, make it a joke, and a new, unbreakable wall of awkwardness would be erected between us forever. Our friendship, the thing I cherished even in its painful limitations, would be irrevocably damaged. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't lie here and wait for that moment of rejection. I had to get out. I had to create distance, re-establish the old boundaries before he had a chance to. My movements were infinitely slow, agonizingly careful. I held my breath, lifting his arm an inch at a time. It was heavy, a dead weight of sleep. His fingers were curled slightly, and as I moved his hand, they brushed against the fabric of my t-shirt, a phantom touch that made my skin tingle. I managed to lift his arm and slide out from under it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I eased myself towards the edge of the bed, my muscles screaming in protest at the slow, controlled motion. I swung my legs over the side, my feet finding the cold floor. I was free. I stood up, my own body trembling now, not from cold, but from adrenaline and fear. I risked a look back at him. He hadn't stirred. He had simply rolled onto his back, one arm flung out across the empty space where I had just been. His face was relaxed in sleep, his lips slightly parted. The morning light was kind to him, softening the angles of his face, catching in the dark stubble on his jaw. He looked beautiful. He looked like a secret I was not meant to keep. I fled the room, my bare feet silent on the floorboards. I closed the bedroom door behind me with a quiet, nearly inaudible click. The living room was a mess. The discarded quilt, his damp clothes from the night before, 2 empty tea mugs. It was the evidence of our shared crisis. I moved on autopilot, my mind a buzzing hive of anxiety. I picked up the quilt and folded it. I gathered his wet clothes and took them to the small laundry room off the kitchen, starting a load. I washed the mugs and set them in the drying rack. I was erasing the night, trying to reset the scene back to normal. I put on a pot of coffee, the familiar, comforting aroma filling the apartment. It was a normal morning ritual. Coffee was normal. If I could just act normal, maybe everything would be normal. Maybe he would wake up, have a cup of coffee, and we could pretend that he had slept on the couch all night. Maybe my own memory was flawed. Maybe he hadn't held me at all. It was a desperate, stupid lie, and I knew it. I stood leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping the hot, black coffee, and waited. I was a soldier in a trench, waiting for the inevitable bombardment. Every tiny sound from the bedroom, a rustle of sheets, a soft cough, made me jump. My nerves were stretched taut, ready to snap. Finally, I heard the bedroom door creak open. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the street outside my kitchen window, where the world was washed clean and glistening after the storm. I heard his footsteps, hesitant, padding into the living room. Then they stopped. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He was standing there, just outside the kitchen, and I could feel his gaze on my back. "Morning," he said. His voice was low, raspy with sleep. I took another sip of coffee before turning around, composing my face into what I hoped was a mask of casual friendliness. "Morning," I replied, my voice miraculously steady. "Coffee's fresh." He was leaning against the doorframe, wearing my clothes, his hair a mess. He looked rumpled and soft, and utterly devastating. His eyes, however, were not soft. They were sharp and focused, and they were fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. There was no confusion in them, no dawning horror, just watchfulness. He didn't move to get coffee. He just stood there, looking at me. "Leo," he said, and his voice was different. The usual easygoing lilt was gone. It was quiet, serious. "About last night. Here it comes. The apology. The explanation. The awkward laugh." I braced myself. "You don't have to say anything." I cut in quickly, trying to head it off. "It's fine. You were freezing. It was a weird night. No big deal." I even managed a small, dismissive shrug. It was a masterful performance, if I did say so myself. Cool, unbothered friend. But Sam didn't take the out I had so graciously offered him. He pushed himself off the doorframe and walked slowly into the kitchen, stopping just a few feet away from me. The small space suddenly felt claustrophobic. "No," he said, his voice firm. "It's not no big deal. I woke up this morning, and you were gone." I frowned, confused. I was making coffee. "No," he repeated, shaking his head slightly. "You were gone from the bed. And the first thing I felt was cold." He looked down at his bare feet for a moment, then back up at me, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't feel cold all night, Leo. Not when I was next to you." My breath hitched. This was not the script I had prepared for. He wasn't laughing it off. He wasn't making excuses. He was talking about it. He was dissecting the moment I was desperately trying to forget. "I wasn't just getting warm," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, forcing me to lean in slightly to hear him. "I was sleeping. I mean, really sleeping. I haven't slept like that in I don't know how long. Years." Maybe. He took another step closer. We were barely a foot apart now. I could smell the faint, sleepy scent of him, mingled with the aroma of coffee and my soap. "Jessica," he said, and the name of his most recent ex-girlfriend landed between us like a stone. "She broke up with me 2 weeks ago. Did I tell you that?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. "She said I was distant, emotionally unavailable. She said it felt like I was always holding a part of myself back, that I was never really there." Even when I was holding her, he let out a humorless, self-deprecating laugh. She wasn't wrong. My heart ached for him, a familiar, painful pang of sympathy and something more. I had seen him go through a dozen breakups. I had been the one he came to for beer and commiseration. But this felt different. He wasn't just complaining about a relationship ending. He was talking about himself. "Last night," he said, his eyes searching mine, as if he was looking for an answer there. When I was holding you, I felt present. I don't know what I felt, Leo, but it wasn't distant. It wasn't unavailable." He took the final step, closing the space between us. He was so close now I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. He reached out, not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate motion, and placed his hand on the counter next to mine, his fingers just a fraction of an inch from my own. "I woke up," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A couple of times during the night. I knew where I was. I knew what I was doing." The world tilted on its axis. My carefully constructed narrative of his unconsciousness, of his blissful ignorance, crumbled into dust. He had been awake. He had known. He had held me, knowing he was holding me. I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to process the impossible implication of his words. He knew, and he hadn't pulled away. He had stayed. He had continued to hold me. "Sam," I breathed, his name a question, a plea, a terrified hope. He finally looked down at our hands, so close on the countertop. Then, with that same agonizing slowness, he covered my hand with his. His palm was warm and large and slightly calloused. It enveloped mine completely. It was not the casual, fleeting touch of a friend. It was a conscious, deliberate act of connection. A statement. He lifted his eyes back to mine. The watchfulness was gone, replaced by a raw, terrifying vulnerability that mirrored my own. "That wasn't just the cold, Leo," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "I don't think it's ever just been the cold." And then he leaned in. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch into an infinite, silent moment. I could see the slight tremor in his hand as it held mine. I could see the question in his eyes. He was giving me a chance to pull away, to stop him. He was giving me the choice I hadn't had in the dark. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, caught in the gravity of a moment I had spent a decade convincing myself could never happen. His lips met mine. It was not a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft. It was hesitant. It was a question asked in a language we had never spoken before. His lips were warm and gentle, and they tasted faintly of sleep and my tea and something that was just purely, unmistakably Sam. A tremor went through my body, a full-body shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a shock of recognition, a feeling of something long lost finally clicking into place. This was not a dream. This was not a mistake. This was Sam, kissing me, in my kitchen, in the clean, quiet light of morning. I let out a shaky breath, and my own lips parted slightly. It was all the encouragement he needed. The kiss deepened, just a fraction, but the change was profound. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a quiet, dawning certainty. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. It was a gesture of such incredible tenderness that it brought tears to my eyes. I lifted my free hand, my movements feeling slow and clumsy, and placed it on his chest, over his heart. I could feel it beating, a steady, strong rhythm beneath my palm. It was beating just as fast as my own. We broke apart, but he didn't move away. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. We stood there, breathing the same air, his hand holding mine on the counter, my hand on his chest, our foreheads pressed together. The silence in the room was no longer tense or awkward. It was full. It was peaceful. I started, but my voice failed me. I didn't know what to say. What could I possibly say that would encompass the entirety of the last 10 years, the entirety of the last 12 hours? "It's okay," he whispered, as if he could read my mind. "We don't have to figure it all out right now." He opened his eyes, and they were so close, so clear. I didn't want you to think that last night didn't mean anything. I thought you would regret it. I confessed, the words a painful admission of my own insecurity. I thought you'd wake up and run. A small, sad smile touched his lips. I've been running for a long time, Leo, he said softly. From a lot of things. From myself, mostly. He squeezed my hand. I'm tired of running. And this, he glanced around my small, quiet kitchen, then his eyes settled back on my face. This doesn't feel like something to run from. It feels like the opposite of that. The opposite of running. It was the most beautiful, hopeful thing I had ever heard. The spell was broken by a mundane sound, the gentle thumping of the washing machine in the other room, signaling the end of its cycle. His clothes, our shared reality, intruding on the magic of the moment. He pulled back slightly, a flicker of the old, familiar Sam returning to his eyes, a hint of a playful grin. So, he said, his voice lighter, is breakfast part of this life-saving service you provide, or is that extra? I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like it came from a place deep inside me that had been dormant for years. The relief was so immense, so overwhelming, it was almost painful. He wasn't pulling away. He was staying. He was making jokes. He was asking for breakfast. I think I can manage some pancakes, I said, my voice still a little shaky. But you're on dish duty. Deal, he said without hesitation. He finally released my hand, but the warmth of his touch lingered. He moved to the cabinet to get plates, his movements easy and natural, as if he had done it 100 times before. He belonged here. The thought that had terrified me last night now felt like a profound and wonderful truth. We made breakfast together, a comfortable, chaotic dance in the small kitchen. We bumped into each other, our shoulders brushing, our hands touching as we both reached for the milk. But now, these accidental touches were different. They weren't things to be ignored or brushed off. They were small, thrilling acknowledgments of the new space we were navigating. A question and an answer in a single, fleeting contact. I mixed the batter while he set the table. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he moved around my apartment. He wasn't a guest anymore. He was something else, something more. The sight of him, this big, beautiful man in my too small flannel pants, carefully arranging my mismatched plates and cutlery, filled me with a feeling so warm and expansive I thought my chest might burst. We sat across from each other at my small dining table, sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. We ate pancakes and drank coffee, and we talked. Not about the big, terrifying things. Not about what this meant or where we were going. We talked about his job, about a stupid movie I had watched, about his disaster of an apartment. We fell back into the easy, familiar rhythm of our friendship, but it was underpinned now by a new current, a low, humming vibration of unspoken intimacy. Every so often, I would look up and find him just watching me, a small, quiet smile on his face. And I would smile back, a real, uninhibited smile that reached my eyes. I felt seen. For the first time, I felt like he was seeing all of me, not just the convenient, reliable friend, but the man who had been quietly in love with him for a third of his life. After breakfast, he kept his promise and did the dishes. I stood beside him, drying them and putting them away. The simple, domestic act was more intimate than anything I had ever imagined. The clink of plates, the warm, soapy water, the comfortable silence between us. It was a glimpse of a life I had never allowed myself to want. When the last dish was put away, he turned off the water and dried his hands. He leaned back against the counter, his expression turning serious again. My landlord called, he said. Plumber's on his way. He thinks I should be able to get back in tonight. My heart sank. Of course, the real world. The storm was over, and the port was no longer needed. He would go home. And what then? Would this morning become a strange, beautiful aberration, a secret we never spoke of again? The old anxieties, the familiar fears, came creeping back. I just nodded, unable to meet his eyes, and started meticulously wiping down the already clean countertop. Leo, his voice was soft, and I felt his hand on my arm, stilling my frantic, pointless movements. I looked up at him. I have to go home, he said. But I don't. I don't want to. The confession was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap. You don't, I whispered. He shook his head, his eyes full of a sincerity that took my breath away. No, I'd rather stay here, he paused. Then a slow, hopeful smile spread across his face. Unless, of course, the whole homeless best friend deal has a 24-hour limit. Hope, bright and dizzying, surged through me. The limit is flexible, I managed to say, a grin breaking out on my own face. Good, he said. He stepped closer, his hands coming up to rest on my waist. It was a confident, possessive gesture that made my knees feel weak. Because I have a feeling it's going to take a long time to fix my apartment. Yeah. I asked, my voice breathy. Yeah, he confirmed, his gaze dropping to my lips. A really, really long time. He kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated joy. A kiss of homecoming. It was full of unspoken promises, of new beginnings, of a future I had never been brave enough to imagine. As I kissed him back, I thought about the storm. It had been a destructive, chaotic force, tearing things apart. But it had also washed everything clean. It had broken down walls. And it had forced a truth to the surface that had been hiding in the dark for far too long. And in the quiet, sunlit aftermath, standing here in my kitchen, wrapped in his arms, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The storm had brought him to my door. The storm had brought me home.